I was trying to give tortured and poetic, but I think I'm giving more so Vampire Bride. I'm not mad about it though. I'm definitely not mad about it. I cannot believe we're finally here. It's Tortured Poets release weekend. And I'm totally chill and acting normal about it. Oh my God, I love it. I love it so much. She is the most vulnerable she's ever been. It is so emotionally rich. I think especially in comparison to Midnight's, she's not holding back at all. When we listened to Midnight's, we got the sense that she wasn't really telling the full story. Here it is. Yep, here it is. And wow. Before I get into my recommendations, let me just tell you my top 3 after first few couple of listens. Oh my God. First of all, the fact that it was a double album, for once we weren't clowning. And wow, thank God, because that second half is amazing. So my top 3 are number 1, Guilty as Sin. I think it's the best song by far, but I think it's also maybe in the very top of her discography now. I absolutely love it. Second for me is Down Bad. And then third has been changing all around the more I listen. I'm gonna go with Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. Subject to change at any moment of time though. I would love to know your top 3, or if you're able to choose top 1, comment it below. And with that, let's go ahead and get into some recommendations. Now, if you are here looking for poetry recommendations, love that for you, but actually I already have another video about that. So go ahead and check this one out. Right when the album was announced, I made this video recommending some of my favorite poetry collections or just poets in general. And I would love if you would check it out. But today I'm purely going to be suggesting mainly fiction, some nonfiction, based off the tracks. And please keep in mind, it literally came out at midnight last night. So these are my off-the-cuff suggestions, like truly my first impressions. I really wanted to recommend a track for every single book like I did in my 1989 video. I wasn't really expecting us to get 31 tracks. So for now, I just went through and picked out some books that immediately jumped out to me when I first listened, and I'm just gonna go ahead and recommend those to you. And then hopefully I'll make a follow-up video with more recommendations in the future, especially if there's any one specific song you're looking for a recommendation for. If I don't get to it in this video, please comment down below and I will try to in the next one. First up, we have track 1, Fortnight. Fortnight was not what I was expecting at all, mainly because I had been listening to that AI cover that was going around TikTok. The vibe is completely different and I love it. I think it is such a good song. I really enjoyed Post Malone on it as well. And when I listened to it, I immediately thought of The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. The Girl on the Train is the story of this woman, Rachel, who through some very unfortunate circumstances, such as not being able to conceive a child, her husband has left her and she has turned to alcohol. And becoming an alcoholic is a huge part of the story. Rachel doesn't tell her roommate, but she has lost her job. And so every single day she gets on the train pretending like she's going to work, but instead she's really just walking around and making some observations. And through doing this, she becomes obsessed with this couple that she sees in their home passing them. She starts to suspect a crime was committed. But the thing about this is, since Rachel is an alcoholic, she frequently blacks out from her drinking. And when that happens, she cannot remember what happens at all. So she starts to suspect that she might have played a role in this crime. This one really makes me think of Fortnite because there are honestly a lot of parallels. One of the obvious ones is that Taylor mentions becoming an alcoholic in the song, which obviously fits with Rachel, but just kind of the whole message of it about becoming good neighbors, watching your wife water the flowers. I want to kill her. I want to kill him. It really feels like to me how Rachel has become obsessed with her ex-husband's new relationship and how she looks at them and how they now have this perfect marriage that she wasn't able to have because she couldn't conceive a child. Let's just say Rachel can relate to, I love you, it's ruining my life. This next one is a really obvious one, but it felt pretty necessary to include it, and that is Just Kids paired up with the Tortured Poets department. If you listen to it, then you know that Taylor referenced Patti Smith in the song. She mentions Patti Smith and her relationship with Dylan Thomas, who was another artist, and the time they spent at the Chelsea Hotel, which admittedly, I haven't read this book, but I got it from the library, so I can read it now. My understanding is that this book, as well as the song, kind of discusses the relationship between two artists and how the creation of art can become destructive. Kind of that idea that in order to create good art, you have to be depressed or suffering. So one of the things I think Taylor's talking about in that song is about how her and her partner are both artists and how by creating their art, they're sort of ruining the relationship in some way. So I think if you're interested in the dynamic between two artists, specifically two musicians, then you should definitely check this one out. If nothing else, to get the lore of Patti Smith and the Chelsea Hotel and all that. Next up, I have one that is pretty silly, but the parallels were just so on point that I couldn't not talk about it. And that would be how Down Bad relates to New Moon. Come on. This is the most Bella and New Moon coded song possibly of all time. In the song, Taylor's talking about the aftermath of a relationship that has ended that was so life-changing. I think she says herself that it was cosmic, that after that it feels like, what's the point? If I can't be with that guy, what's the point of even living? Now, who else has said that? I heard an interview of Taylor talking about this song, and she said that it's kind of a metaphor of how this relationship was like being abducted by aliens, and you get to see this new cosmic world you've never experienced before, and then when you're brought back down to earth, it's like, literally, what am I supposed to do with myself? So I think that kind of supernatural, fantastical vibe also really fits well with Twilight, since Edward is a vampire. Bella's introduced to this whole new world of, you know, these beautiful, immortal people that she clearly idolizes. And in New Moon, sorry to spoil, Edward leaves her. She's literally left thinking, fuck it if I can't have him. Next up, I'm gonna recommend a song for Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. I love this one. I love the way she screams, Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. It just hits you. You can just feel her passion and anger, all the metaphors in there and references to kind of feeling like a circus animal, being caged, and then kind of her captors being surprised by her lashing out in this environment. And she's kind of saying, what did you expect? And that really made me think of my favorite girl, Jude Durante in The Cruel Prince. If you are familiar with my channel, you know I love The Cruel Prince. The Cruel Prince follows a mortal girl, Jude Durante, and she's forced to live up and try to survive in this world of fairies and other fantastical creatures who really do not respect humans at all. So she's really fighting to be taken seriously and seen as something vicious and ruthless that these people should be afraid of. I think the line, I am what I am because you trained me, immediately made me think of this. Because Jude is raised up in the fairy world, she's trained to fight like them. She learns their kind of military tactics, and when she eventually uses that against those people to fight for a position of power, it's kind of like, what did you expect? Exactly like what Taylor's saying. I think Jude would also be screaming, Who's afraid of little old me? And I also really think it fits somehow even better with The Wicked King. If you know, you know. This is the sequel, so I'm not gonna really say anything about it, but oh my God, please read the series. And this song just has such a strong, like, feminist energy to it, of kind of the feeling of critiquing people, of being doubtful of women and their strength. And Jude is just like the strongest girl. She's everything. And I think this is such a Jude song. So if you love Who's Afraid of Little Old Me, you gotta read this. And we of course have to talk about one of the most heartbreaking songs on the album, LOML, which could either stand for Love of My Life or Loss of My Life. And that kind of juxtaposition itself immediately reminded me of Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is another book that you really just don't need me to recommend because I'm sure we all know about it by now, but Normal People follows Marielle and Connell through many years of their life and how every time they're so close to being together, it somehow falls apart. I think the song and this book is just full of empty promises. So much of what could have been. The line of, I wish we could unrecall how we almost had it all. You know? Another detail that really made me think of Marielle and Connell's relationship is the line that mentions about talking shit. The muse in Taylor's song is talking shit about her to his friends. And if that's not Connell, Connell's afraid to make their relationship public because he thinks his friends at school are gonna make fun of him. So he never stands up for her, at least in the beginning of the novel. And it is just so devastating to watch. So if you feel like having your heart ripped out, like the same feeling you got when you listened to that song, you should be reading Normal People. Next, I have one of my nonfiction picks, but stick with me. Hear me out, okay? So the song I Can Do It With a Broken Heart is this very contrasting song, something Taylor does best. Fun, upbeat pop production paired with the most devastating lyrics ever. And it kind of explains how, you know, at least in this specific moment in time, but maybe throughout her whole life, when she's experiencing heartbreak, and specifically at the Eras Tour, she still had to go on and perform and act like everything was okay. And that's kind of where the line comes, I can do it with a broken heart. But at the same time, she mentions how it feels like her world is shattering apart and she's miserable. So some of those feelings and the way that you function with heartbreak made me think of one of my favorite books, Heartbreak, A Personal and Scientific Journey. This is a nonfiction book about a woman in her 50s who is going through her first heartbreak, and it's actually her divorce. I believe she was married for like 25 years, and her now ex-husband end up falling apart, and they do get a divorce. And Florence Williams documents the process of her going through heartbreak grief. Not only the mental effects that has on her, but the physical as well. So that's where the scientific journey comes in. She literally studies the chemicals that change in your brain when you're going through a heartbreak. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff that makes you literally feel physically sick, or it literally raises your cortisol levels, and it's increasing that fight or flight instinct in your body. It just has so many insane effects, and it's so fascinating. I love this book. If you're interested in heartbreak grief at all, I think it's a must read. I thought it was interesting to compare that, to think about what was literally going on in Taylor's body, like the biology of it, how much she must have been mentally and physically suffering, but she was still able to put on a show for us. I highly recommend this one. I'm sorry to once again recommend a series that does not need to be recommended at all, just because people are already talking about it so much, but I feel like I have to mention the parallels between ACOTAR and My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys. And specifically, the parallels more so come in A Court of Mist and Fury, but I'm gonna try not to spoil it. My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys talks about a relationship that has gone sour and has been kind of doomed from the start because of who the love interest was. He was never gonna be someone who was gonna take care of his toys and at the end of the day, treat his lover the way they deserve to be treated. And without spoiling too much, I'm sure most of you have read this, so if you know, you know. My girl Feyre doesn't really get treated too well in a certain relationship. She's boarded up in order to be protected by her lover, but her voice isn't heard, and that in turn destroys her. I think that kind of, the way that relationship, it's doomed from the start. I'm just drawing the parallels because I feel like Feyre was that boy's favorite toy, and he broke her. I'm not gonna say more, but if you know, you know. Here we have another very obvious parallel, but I wanted to mention it, and that is for Peter Pan. I love when Taylor uses literary references in her songs, and we first saw her use the Peter Pan and Wendy relationship as a metaphor in Cardigan. I thought it was so interesting that she brought it back up in this album. In the song Peter, she's kind of talking about this relationship where she was waiting around for her lover to kind of grow up, man up, but much like Peter Pan, he's unable to do that. And she's just stuck in this very immature relationship and is ultimately ghosted. I think that's what the conclusion is. Maybe there's like a Peter Pan retelling that really fits with that, but I haven't read any. So once again, I just thought it was worth mentioning the source material. I think it'd be fun to read Peter Pan and kind of cross-reference those lines where she mentions Peter and Wendy. This is the one that I am the most excited about because when I first listened to the song, it was the first time ever in my Swiftie experience where I was immediately like, oh my God, I know this lore. I know this. She wrote this for me. And that would be Cassandra. If you haven't made the connection already, Taylor is very specifically talking about the story of Cassandra from Greek mythology. If you're not familiar, Cassandra is a figure in Greek mythology who has the power of foresight. She can see the future. The downside? No one believes her. No one believes a word she says. So Cassandra tries to warn the people about the Trojan War and no one believes her. And I think in that song, Taylor is referencing the Reputation era and how people didn't believe her when she was telling the truth about that situation and everything that went down. And now everything has since come to the light. So it's kind of just like a, see, I told ya. This is potentially the most perfect comparison I have, and that is Shit Cassandra Saw by Gwen E. Kirby. This is actually a short story collection, but I think all of them are relevant. Obviously, the most specific one is the titular story, Shit Cassandra Saw. This is a short story about Cassandra, and it talks about her power of foresight and how, again, no one believes her, and how in her time period that is really unbeneficial to her. But in this short story, she sees further than the Trojan War. She sees all the way to modern times and like the women's right movement. She kind of gets to laugh at the Trojans, being like, I know you're not gonna believe me, but oh my God, you're definitely not gonna believe what's coming. Imagine this, women get rights. It is my absolute favorite short story. I love this book. I think all the stories in here are fantastic. Pretty much every single story in here has some sort of underlying feminist message. I seriously cannot recommend this one enough. And while we're talking about this, I also want to share, I love the story of Cassandra so much that I actually did this illustration of her many years ago for one of my graphic design classes, and I actually sell prints on my Etsy. So if you are interested, the link is down below. And for now, that's all I have. As I mentioned earlier, these were my off-the-cuff impressions of the album and the first books that came to mind. I'm really excited about all these, and I think I made some good comparisons. But I think whenever I'm able to make another video, after I've had more time to kind of absorb the album and go back through and look at all the references, I will have even better recommendations. So if you're interested in seeing that, well, you should probably subscribe. Just in general, if you're interested in seeing book and Swiftie content, that's kind of my sweet spot. I have a few other videos up on my channel already. I have a little Swiftie playlist that I'll link somewhere if I can, but I have every intention of doing book recommendations for every single Taylor Swift album. Please stick around. I would love to chat with you about books and Taylor Swift. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, do not forget to let me know what your favorite track is, and let me know what you think about these book comparisons that I've found, and if you found a new recommendation that you think you're gonna enjoy. All right, that's all I have for us, but I hope you enjoy this album so much. I will see you in the next one.